I want to talk with you today about the values of compassion and empathy. That's where I want to begin. And I want you to think about those values throughout the presentation. I'm going to hope to finish up my part of it within, say, half an hour and leave some time for an Ask Me Anything. And that is why you have an index card. So you can ask me anything. And you can do it anonymously, and if you're shy, you don't have to put your hand up. So you have a handout, and we will get to the handout, and you've got the card. And I hope that you will make use of that card, because it really helps me to know where you're coming from. So think of me as an itinerant English professor. I'm an American literary historian, and I teach English composition. I've taught hundreds of students over the years. I've loved it, I've struggled with it, I've loved it, and I've struggled with it, I guess, a lot like your experience. Over the years, I became a department chair, and then I became a vice provost, and then I became a dean. In 2008, I found myself pulled, like magnetically pulled, to work at the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Now, have you heard of AAC&U? Oh, okay, so a lot of you do know about it. We're an NGO, a nonprofit. We were founded in 1915. We are really the only organization in the world, a nonprofit devoted to general education and liberal education, and people from all around the world, not just in the United States, come to us. So in 2008, I gave up my full professorship in English and American literature and women's studies at the College of New Jersey, and I gave up my deanship at the college. I was dean of what was then called Culture and Society, now Humanities and Social Sciences, and I came to AAC&U to work on their centennial campaign. Now that centennial campaign is the LEAP campaign. LEAP means Liberal Education and America's Promise. You know AAC&U, have you heard of LEAP? Yes. Okay, well that's really good. And you're okay with that L word? that L word, which is not political liberalism. It really isn't. In fact, it's a liberating, mind-liberating education. I wish we had a better word for it. We have so much trouble with the word liberal. And some of the features of the LEAP campaign that you've heard of, in fact, that you've already heard mentioned, essential learning outcomes, high impact practices, value rubrics. You know about all these things? Okay, principles of excellence. So I gave up my tenure, and people said, you are totally nuts. Like, why would you do that? Why would you go to Washington? So a decade later, you know, I've been a vice president, and I'm phasing into new adventures, my version of retirement, and I'm in this sort of liberating, liminal moment for reflection and plain speaking. I feel so very lucky to have had this career. I feel like I've gained a national perspective on higher education and global education I wouldn't have gotten any other way. And I guess I want to share that. I was out in California working with the Cal State universities and marching down a hall with a bunch of faculty, and I ducked into the women's room, and I overheard them saying, we lost our national perspective, and I realized this is some kind of like identity change for me. Okay, I want to do that. You know, and you look back over your career, and you see the experiences that help you make a choice, maybe like mine, and I can see that now. What brought me here. 1957, what happened in 1957? Sputnik, right? Sputnik went up. My family moved from upstate New York to Dallas, Texas, so that my father could work on the space race. And I found my young self at 7 years old living in the midst of Jim Crow segregation. It was a heck of a change. We had an African-American housekeeper named Vera, who used to talk to me about what was, you know, life was like under Jim Crow, about things that I could see, the buses and those horrible water fountains. My first political action was to drink out of a colored water fountain. It was an unforgettable moment. I got caught, I got shook, I got pulled away. those lunch counters, demeaning signs, and Vera used to just answer my questions with gently and with dignity. It was helping me to glimpse her experience as a loving mother, a working woman who kept on going, kept her back straight through the unspeakably demeaning experiences of segregation. And I never forgot those conversations. So I might have arrived where I am right now anyway, but I think that Vera woke me up. We hear a lot now about being woke. Well, that was my woke moment, and it did something to me, making me realize that I wanted to, and I always have wanted to, devote energy to students who were shut out of the best mind-liberating education. It was there. That's how I started to think about that. How so many students are pushed into narrow training and not given a chance for critical thinking. That opened my eyes. And I bet that you, many of you, all of you maybe, had a similar experience that woke you up and made you feel passionate about teaching and compassionate and empathic. And I want you to think back to those experiences now. Here we are, it's 2017, and we're in a period again when issues related to demographic diversity, immigration have coalesced once again with tremendous intensity, and we seem to have entered a new era of dispute over what it means to be an American, what it means to have civil rights, what it means to have educational rights. And our students, yours at Adelphi and all over the country, are more diverse than they've ever been before. Nationally, maybe you know this, more than 70% of students are not traditional, sometimes called post-traditional, sometimes called new majority. Most of them are first generation and low income. There are a lot of adults in them. English is second, third, fourth, or fifth language. Ask any cab driver. Many are students of color. Many are working to cover the cost of college. And I looked at your website and I discovered about half of your students have come from groups that have not been served well by higher education. And you have large numbers of women who are students. So you also have high percentages of students on financial aid and financial assistance and scholarship with a fairly high, moderately high Pell Grant rate. So what I conclude is that your students and their families are working really, really hard to support their attendance at Adelphi. And I bet that some of them are struggling. So we know that students now are demographically different. But how else are they different? Sam mentioned some differences. Shout out to me. Are students different now? And these don't have to be negatives. What are some of the differences that you've seen?
They work long hours to earn money.
They work long hours to earn money, so they're exhausted, and you want them to get into project-based learning, and how the heck do you do that, right? It's really, really tough when you're working those hours. Other differences you've seen? Oh, say it again?
They commute long distances.
They commute a long way. The media, they're media-driven. Did I hear you? Yeah, the technology, the effects of technology are really, really profound. It's changed attention span, cognition. That's true. Those are our differences. Other things you've heard?
They have to balance multiple roles. School life is not always their top priority.
Absolutely, multiple roles. Maybe parents, I hear they commute from all over the place to get here, that many of you do too. Yeah, other things. They read less, and they want instant gratification. Yeah, and they don't have as much time to put into studying. Anything else? You've hit all of mine, except for one. I saw a hand, yeah.
They really don't have an understanding of what a diverse world is.
Right. Right. So diversity has a whole new meaning. And you are hugely diverse. And most schools in the New York region are hugely diverse. I have done a lot of work with community colleges. I think there are 120 languages at Queensborough. Oh, it's really incredible. So I bet you have heard people say that students are not ready for college. Have you heard that? You have. So here's my question to you, seriously. How do we collectively grow and revive our passion for teaching and learning, because we were passionate about this or we wouldn't be doing it? The values of compassion and empathy that we bring to teaching with a whole new generation of students. How do you use compassion and empathy as guides? And for me, the LEAP framework was it. It's a strong and a flexible framework, and it helps me figure that out. It's helping people all over the country figure that out. Now, I gave you a handout. It has the LEAP Essential Learning Outcomes on one side and the Principles of Excellence on the other side. And if you would just get that out and take it seriously. Some of you have seen this before. Could you put your hands up if you've seen it before? For some of you, this is new. Okay. So we did a consensus project starting in the 1990s to try and figure out what 21st century learning outcomes ought to be. And I want to say that with diversity and equity in mind for absolutely all students, and students, including students in career and technical. What should 21st century outcomes in education be? I've learned about this project when I was at Temple as vice provost in the mid-1990s, and I got involved, and that's how I got to know AAC and U. So these outcomes, the essential learning outcomes, came from conversations with educators and politicians and business leaders all around the country, and they were different from outcomes. Well, we didn't really talk about outcomes in the past so much as we talk about them now. And I just want to walk through a couple of things about them. The first outcome is knowledge of human cultures in the physical and natural world, and that's our world. We know that. We've been there for years and years. But you see there's something different about that knowledge. It's focused by engagement with problems that are both contemporary and enduring. And that brings some changes on the way I thought about knowledge with all of my degrees in English. The second is intellectual and practical skills. An array of things about communication and creativity. We knew those were there, but people told us, this is how you think about skills now. Okay, that sounds pretty traditional, but the third and fourth essential learning outcomes were really different. The third was personal and social responsibility, and that's where you think about intercultural competence, ability to think about equity, to think about equality, to think of your own personal responsibility and your social meaning. We hadn't so much thought about that as a college outcome, and this should be for both gen ed and the majors. That's what we were hearing. And the fourth one is the really tough one, and I think it's where people are stuck right now in gen ed redesigns, and I want to come back to it. The fourth one is integrative and applied learning. And you've already said some things. People have said, you know, people want hands-on learning. They want to learn how to learn in a way that sort of reflects the work that they're already doing. There's so many working students. So these outcomes are supposed to be good for absolutely all students, and they're supposed to be helping us understand how to get them ready for the lives they really are going to live. And that means a totally different approach to the curriculum. But as we know, you need this kind of education. The world can change amazingly fast. Look at what's going on around us right now. And sure, you can get a job if you've got a good liberal education. But beyond that, it's always been an education focused seriously on democracy, on democratic learning and engagement. And in this moment, it isn't just academic to wonder what freedom of speech means. I mean, I really wish I were teaching a comp class right now. I miss it, because it would be an amazing time to be talking about the power of language and to explore what that power means. So it's essential in this moment to have the flexibility of mind and critical thinking skills to know what to do as a citizen who cares for people who want to be citizens, to understand, for heaven's sakes, health insurance and health care, an education that is aimed for active and applied learning, problem solving, and that was timely a dozen years ago. I think it's even more urgently needed now. So the essential learning outcomes are value-laden, and my question to you for reflection, and comment, actually you could comment right now, do those values shape liberal education at Adelphi, both gen ed and your majors? And for some of you, I actually can see a couple of heads going like this. For some of you, yes. I don't know about all of you, but think about that. And I'm happy to take a comment on that if you want. I want to give you a chance to comment more. So they're value-laden. Now, if you flip that sheet over, you'll see principles. And they're less well-known. I love them. This is sort of the philosophy and the social commitment behind the essential learning outcomes. And again, we got to these through a consensus process by talking to people all over the country. I want to say something about the first two. First one is aim high and make excellence inclusive. And the second one is give students a compass. And they're not just slogans. They're saying in a new way, a mind-liberating education that students of color need. First-generation students and immigrants and women and lesbian and gay and bi and transgender and queer students, for students whose minds are wired differently, whose bodies are different, that's all about the democratizing impulse of liberal education, not just narrow training, but opening all the world to the students least likely to have that opportunity. And I think it takes compassion and empathy to give students, all students, a compass and help them feel that they belong on a campus, that they really, really belong there and that they can succeed there. And that is the way to start thinking about to help campuses become ready for the students that they have and that they will have. This is the perspective-changing idea in the book that I wrote with Tia McNair and Michelle Asher Cooper and some other folks. Sometimes it helps to shift perspective when you want to come up with new ideas. If you're writing teachers, you may have known when your students get writer's block, what do? You can say, go someplace weird and try writing. You know, go to a place you've never been and your brain will work differently. Change perspective. The world changed. For a moment, I'd like you to start thinking about changing perspective on students and on programs at Adelphi, and to do that even if it is a little bit unsettling. What might it mean to make yourselves ready for the students you have and the students you will have, instead of saying, change them? We aren't changing the students. We're not immediately going to change K-12, even if we made huge changes. It would be years before we would see a difference. And we're not going to change the effects of information and communication technology, and we can't simply change admissions to be more selective. And to tell you the truth, I hear that all the time. Let's just let in better students. As a problem to be solved isn't going to happen. Think compassionately about that. What if we become more ready for students ourselves? What if we change Adelphi to become a more student-ready college? So that's the premise behind the book, Becoming a Student-Ready College. We incorporated examples in the book from all over the country, trying to use our national perspective, showing how campuses are using those essential learning outcomes for engaged, active, applied, and integrative learning. High-impact practices mapped out for all students, emphasizing the success of the new majority of students, to use the LEAP framework guided by compassion and empathy to achieve equity of outcomes. So, this is sort of the hard part. What if your GE, your Gen Ed, were to be more student ready at Adelphi? Is it? I went and looked at your general education pages, and I looked at a number of the pages about your major programs, and I thought, I'm going to just speak frankly to you. I don't know if you've thought about how ready that is for students, and what would have to change if it would be. You think about that for a moment. You want to say something? Yes, go ahead. Sure.
College, not grade 13.
Right.
That's where so I wanted to know what you're thinking.
Okay. It means meeting them where they are and asking them where they are and believing that every one of them was a success on the way in. Every student who comes here, first time freshman, transfer, is a success. Succeeded in getting out of high school. You know how many kids get lost in high school? I mean, I do. I have a stepson who's an addict, an opioid addict. I know this stuff. It's really tough. They're successful. Ask them what they need to learn. I was going to use this example later, but I'll use it right now. It's a Queens College example. And it uses an approach called culturally responsive teaching. I know somebody at Adelphi is doing culturally responsive work. I think it's a person who's got an office in student affairs. Have you heard that phrase before? Culturally responsive teaching? So my big answer is that's what you need to do. You need to be culturally responsive. And the example at Queens College, I think, is a really, really good one. It's part of a larger project we have at AAC&U called Teaching to Increase Diversity and Equity in STEM. And it really was focused on computer science and on trying to get girls and women to code, okay? So the professor in the TIDES project at Queens College tried this culturally responsive approach to the women in his class, and mostly Latina, pretty diverse group, wouldn't code, and he tried to figure out what the heck do I do to be responsive to them. And he got this idea of coding little LEDs in fabric so you could make programmable clothing. And so if you were really style conscious, you could have this cool stuff. I see someone shaking your head. Have you heard of that? It's wonderful. So, and they wanted it. And they basically said, you want this? You code it. Guess what? All learned to code. All learned to code. It's, to me, a beautiful example. And Chris, the professor, had a conversion experience. So my whole way of thinking about my students has changed. You know, that's the way I want to respond to them, to know who they are and then to figure out where they are. That's one answer. Gosh, there may be others, but did that help you understand? That's kind of a big answer. And that's not typically the way we have thought about general education. You know, if you look back at the history of Gen Ed, what have we done with Gen Ed over the centuries? You know, what has it been for? It was not there to meet the students where they were. It was for another purpose. And I see some heads. What the purpose of Gen Ed was to pour the knowledge in the head, right? And you know this history probably really well. In the 18th century, the early republic, all of college education was called liberal education. That's all there was. And it's everything that we still want. It's the critical thinking and communicating and language skills. And then with the rise of the professions in the 19th century and in the early 20th century, and more people coming to college, the power of the disciplines began to grow, and this other stuff, the liberal education, became something to worry about. They hadn't been inoculated, right? They hadn't been inoculated, and they needed exposure to the arts and sciences. And that's 20th century gen ed. And that led to the distributional model. So you have a lot of distributional courses, right? How many do you have? Hundreds?
Yes, we do.
You have hundreds of distributional courses, and the.
Including learning goals.
But you do have learning goals.
We distinguish them, but we link them together, and they're all part of the program.
Okay, so you've got learning goals, and they're sort of like the LEAP goals. I saw that mentioned somewhere.
They are older-fashioned and more rigidly structured. However, they do emphasize some of these goals. Okay. And then you've got courses because you're worried, you got your courses, you don't want to lose your courses. And that exposure model is still there, and there are hundreds and hundreds of courses that meet gen ed requirements. That was really 20th century gen ed, and toward the end of the century, some new things started happening. People got worried as students began to change, and they started introducing other kinds of experiences into gen ed. And what were some of those new things that came in late 20th century, very early 21st century? I hear something. Information literacy got put in, sure. So some of the goals of traditional arts and sciences changed. Anything else? What else did people do? Yes, as an example of engaged learning. And there were other things like that people started doing. We can't just do the arts and sciences. Let's decorate it up. Let's make it a little more engaging. Study abroad came in, became very popular. Anything else you saw? Absolutely. That was the first really big one that came in to change. Service learning, community engaged learning, really big. We were going whole hog for that when I was at Temple and arguing about the distributionals at the same time. And then the next thing that comes in, you have it, got added, has goals, is kind of all over the place, but it's really important. What do you do when they come in? There you go. Okay? And first year experience came in, and people started working on that. And this is sort of where I picked up at the College of New Jersey. We decided everybody needed a first year experience, right? Now, think about how you choose what you do in the first year experience. At TCNJ, we wanted all the full-time faculty, track faculty, teaching in the FYE. And the idea was we would play to the passions of the faculty. So you got to design your seminar about a thing you were passionate about, and the concept was that if you were passionate about it, that the students would become passionate about it, right? And I think that that's a little bit of what you've done here. I see it, yes. Okay. Now, push that a little bit. Is that student ready?
We're transitioning. These are the conversations that we're having.
These are the conversations that you are having right now. Okay, I think I have enough time to do this. This is where I thought you were. If you turn the page back over and you look at the essential learning outcomes 3 and 4, that's really what I would like you to think about. You've gotten to the point where you've put together elements of what looks like the beginnings of the best 21st century student-ready
gen ed, but there's more that you can do. The personal and social responsibility might be in there, but I can't really tell. Is that something you expect of all Adelphi students? Yes? Yeah, go ahead.
This is one of a global/civic engagement is one of our current learning goals. We're in the process of a continuous and extensive discussion about this and how to make it more relevant within our gen ed program, but also to the individual students.
Yes.
So this is an ongoing and quite complex and forwardly moving discussion.
I think, and I could see that. And so I went out and I started looking at other universities to see if I could find you or similar situations, and I found a few. And it was kind of interesting, and I wanted to share some of what I found with you. It's the fourth one, the integrative and applied, where you get a whole new notion of what gen ed can be. If gen ed and the major are integrated, experiential and applied, mapped by design, you're going to get a totally different experience. Is that hard? Oh my God, yes. It really is hard, especially given the long history of the way we've done gen ed. So I went and I looked at American University. Go look at their website. It's pretty amazing. They're having a major discussion, and maybe it was a battle, about how to map gen ed. Now, AAC&U, I will say, has tried to fuel this discussion. We have a project called General Education Maps and Markers, and it actually is design thinking about gen ed that's integrated with the majors. And if you want a simple example of that, LaGuardia Community College, students come in, they get an e-portfolio, they've got some gen ed questions, they go out and they're collecting answers, solving problems, putting together a portfolio that shows how they're integrating the sort of pre-major Associate of Arts for transfer and the gen ed, okay? That's gen ed Maps and Markers program at LaGuardia. Queensborough Community College has academies that do the same kind of thing. So, but I wanted to look at a four-year institution. American University is going to launch a fully integrative core. They ditched the gen ed label. People don't like that. I get it. It seems so boring, right? Gen ed is something you want to get out of the way. It's something that's supposed to make you well-rounded. You hear that. Okay, so how do you make it an integrative core? Coming in fall 2018, they have got a design of a foundation to capstone plan. They actually have a drawing of it on the web with integrative courses that introduce habits of mind as a concept, epistemology of the discipline. I love that stuff, you get to argue about what that means in math, its limits, and history, its historiography, in literary studies, it's sort of the techniques of close reading. So you get some habits of mind, but you're introduced to complex problem solving that you care about, you student, that you care about in the lower division, with a set of toolkit courses, they call them, in the upper division, and experiential learning mapped through it. And what they said about the distributionals was sort of interesting, and let me read that to you. 2 quick paragraphs. The general education program, or gen ed, is American University's liberal arts requirement, what some institutions call a core or distribution requirement. Schools with a core liberal arts program believe that there's a certain body of knowledge that all educated adults should possess. Those with distribution requirements think students should learn about subjects outside their main course of study. We agree with both of these philosophies, but at AU, we do things a bit differently. We reject the idea that there is any single body of knowledge that constitutes what all educated people should know. What we care about are learning outcomes. That is, how your education helps you become who you are. We believe that our graduates should be equipped with certain intellectual skills and resources if they are to understand the complex dynamics of an increasingly connected global environment. And you can just see them throwing themselves at that problem. And that's going to mean distributional courses are going to go away. And then what? And then what? And have you gotten to that point in your arguments here? No? Want to comment on that? That seems like beyond where you are right now. It's a tough discussion to have. Yes, you want to say something?
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed half of your question.
Okay.
Preparing our students for the set of tools, is that
Part of it.
We're at the stage where we are examining an entire revision of what I would call the polarity of the gen ed system.
Right.
Instead of it being negative and external, a series of requirements imposed upon confused students, we're beginning to look at the process as being not external and negative, but internal and positive, guiding the student through potential futures based upon their known interests, their to-be-discovered interests, by using the major, the minor, and concentrations and clusters. And this is something we are now beginning to discuss. It will be discussed fully at 10:45 today.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Looking at other experiences of other institutions may be helpful. It's really hard work. It is such difficult work. I mean, another personal story, I got interested, I'm a scholar of industrialization, really, 19th century literary history and industrialization. I got interested in public health. So now I actually work in public health a lot. And the role of the humanities in public health could be enormous. And the humanities don't always take advantage of it. So where I've come, finally, is that I need to get my English colleagues, not all of them, but some of them to think about that. That the kind of engagement that you can actually teach the medicine and the humanities, social work, through English. And I think that's a kind of discussion, but it really does change the shape of the major. It changes the shape of the gen ed. And it brings you back to the question somebody asked earlier, how does this become student ready? There's one of my favorite institutions anywhere is Alverno College. Ever hear of it? Oh, it's so famous. And they're like the well I like to go back to. They started the learning outcomes movement, really, in the 70s. Alverno is in Milwaukee. It's Catholic, it's women, and they graduate more women of color than any other institution in the state of Wisconsin. And the way they think about their students and about program planning and design is really organic and beautiful and compassionate. So as one example, I thought I would read to you how they write about outcomes and how they think about being student ready. I wrote about them in the book, in my chapter of the book, because I thought they did it so beautifully. So they say, outcomes for the major provide a goal for the curriculum, but do not by themselves provide coherence. When faculty sit down as a department, we do more than establish exit outcomes. For the graduate, we also work to articulate the developmental nature of the abilities we want students to learn. And every one of your majors has a developmental span within it. We teach toward the exit outcomes and assess students' ability to demonstrate those outcomes in developmentally appropriate ways at each stage of the curriculum, from the very first general education course to the senior seminar. That's what they're trying to do. And it's interesting to me when you think, okay, small women's Catholic college, they're nurturing formation absolutely at the center of what they do forever. But some of those ideas are beginning to influence the behavior of public institutions, community colleges, and four-year comprehensive institutions. And one example that I can think of is Salt Lake Community College. It's pretty big in Salt Lake. Like more than 20,000 students. And they have taken the LaGuardia idea of the e-portfolio and the Queensboro idea of academies, and they're using it for every student. And they literally, the students have the big questions associated with the outcomes. They use the LEAP outcomes. And they're out there working to figure out on their own what to put in their e-portfolio to show that they're learning those outcomes sort of progressively, and everything that goes in the e-portfolio can be assessed, and they're actually assessing it each step of the way. Yes? Sure. Yeah, developmental trajectory of maps and milestones she's asking about. Go ahead. Yeah, yeah. One of the things you can do is to think about where you put them when they come in. And there are two different ways of doing that. But, you know, kind of end of sophomore year, junior year experience is a really great way of doing it. That's what they've done at Portland State for decades. So they actually have a transfer model for gen ed. And it'll now depend on where the students are coming from, because it's interesting. If you had students coming in from LaGuardia, they could hand you their e-portfolio. But that might not be true if they come from somewhere else. But you have to have some design thinking for the transfer students. And the big transfer institutions, which most of the comprehensives are now doing that. So they have a junior year kind of experience. I saw another hand.
Yeah, so you talk about integrating the major and the gen ed.
Yeah.
But what about the students that don't know what they want to major when they come in?
Okay. Let me go back to that example of the academies at Queensboro. If you ask your incoming students what they want to be, they're going to say, I don't know. But ask what they're interested in, and most of them are going to be able to give you an area of work. Could be business, it could be healthcare, could be helping people. Do you know? There are very few, could be STEM. And a lot of them are going to come in if they're first gen because their parents told them they needed to be nurses and doctors and dentists, right? Okay, so what Queensboro's done is to build these academies. So every single student who comes in is in an academy, which is a community within the college. And it's a pretty small college. And they actually devoted extra resources to peer advising for the students who are struggling the most in the academies. And their first to second year retention rate went sky high, like double-digit improvement. So it was thinking about where the students are, figuring out what they're interested in, and actually putting some more resources to help them with their exploration. That's the Queensboro model. Salt Lake is going to try to see if they can do that at scale. But again, that's starting with where they are, what their interest is. Yes?
The general parameters of this plan, is it faculty administered and assessed? Is it administratively administered and assessed?
The strongest ones I know are run by faculty, supported by administration.
How is the general parameter assured as opposed to the individual experience of the teacher in a course?
Oh, you mean how do you...
faculty handle this overall arching objective?
Okay. Gosh, there are a lot of answers possible for that one, but let me just suggest that if you're doing this kind of design work, you need to get people out of their silos. And you probably, I love gen ed committees. I can't tell you the number of years I've served on gen ed committees, but they can't run it. Okay, you really need to pull people from different places and free them to think anew. and out of the silos into a creative space. And the community needs to, you have to take a deep breath and let that unfold. And where I see it really working well, it's a thing of beauty. Elon, might look at Elon. Wow, amazing. Things that they've done. Their writing program, it's so cool. The whole writing program, which is developmental, and it depends on assessment all the way through. The whole point of writing is to get the students ready to write on the first day of graduation, after graduation, and every day after that. So it's a completely, no 5-paragraph essays anywhere near this. It's very focused on writing for problem solving, and they all know that. That's why we're doing writing, and writing assessment in the major is writing assessment for the rest of the student's life. So a very different approach, and they got to that through a kind of design process that was led by faculty. I am going to run out of time. Did you write questions on those cards? Because we really, truly don't have time. But I really would love to have the questions. They're important. I would like to share them with your faculty senate, with your provost. So I hope that you will hand in those cards or take a minute and write the toughest questions you can think of. This is not easy work. It's work you have to approach with empathy and compassion. And it's taken me a long time to be able to know I don't have to just lead with my head, I can lead with my heart on this. Because every one of us is here because we believe in our students. We want the best for them and for their children. And I want to leave you with that thought as I send you off on your day to have some conversations about where we're going. Thanks very much. Do you want me to add any? I mean, it's 10:30, so I did my job, but any
compelling questions that you would like to ask now? You could also please hand in your cards if you have questions, and Susan will...
I'm going to stay and go to your workshops and talk to you, and I'll share whatever. This is sort of a garbage can. It's got so much from...
We have a question up here.
Yeah. Sure. Ah.
More about how would they be able to do that? Because coming here at Adelphi, where it is a place that is in the 10th most segregated area in the U.S., I think one of the challenges is that you're having the context, and the context sets how far you can get with independent thinking.
Absolutely.
So that's interesting for me to hear.
Sure. Actually, I struggled more with questions like this at the College of New Jersey than I did when I taught at St. Olaf College, where matters of faith were just out there. You dealt with them, okay? TCNJ, we were afraid. Well, we had to figure our way out. How do you talk about religion in a public institution? But to get to your question, there are many different kinds of Catholic institutions. And it is, I mean, there's so many different traditions of Catholicism. And some are more open and liberatory than others. So you may hear of some Catholic institutions that have a lot of trouble with concepts that are related to liberal thinking that sort of cross paths with traditions of Catholicism. But right now, not just Alverno, but Georgetown is really pushing limits in thinking of educational formation. Formation is the word for the education in the faith, and truly pushing boundaries and making it global. And that means opening up to discussions with Islam and really rethinking the place of faith in the institution. And Georgetown has struggled with a history of slavery. You probably have heard those stories. So it'll depend on the context of the individual institution. Sometimes faith-based institutions can offer a great model to a secular institution. But I think there's some things that are shared and that you can learn. You can learn from both sides.